Hello everyone, this is Leah Whitehorse from Astrology, and this is a great big Q&A video. Basically, my website is having its 10th anniversary this month on the 24th of August. Which is unbelievable. I can't get it into my head that a whole decade of my life has just kind of disappeared. But to celebrate this, I asked on my Facebook page, both of my pages actually, if anybody had a question, because I thought it might be nice just to do a Q&A and get some questions from everybody. And I had a fantastic response. Thank you so much to everyone who replied. I have loads and loads and loads of questions. So what I've done, I've kind of separated them up into roughly some topics, so that we've got a little bit of continuity in the video. And also it's possible if it gets too long, I may end up separating them up. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. It's kind of 9 o'clock in the morning and I'm just seeing where the day takes me with these questions. So the first load of questions is going to be more about me and my work and how I came to this work and so on. The first question is from Paula, and Paula says, it would be nice to hear how you got on to the astrology path and how did the transition to professional happen? Also, where does the name Law Astrology come from? Thank you. Oh, and do you ever get bored of reading the skies? Which made me laugh. No, I'll answer that one straight away. No, it's like there is so much to learn with astrology. I feel like I'm an eternal student. In my birth chart, I have a very full 9th house. So the 9th house, amongst other things, is connected with the idea of academic learning and wanting to always broaden your horizons and so on. So for me, there is so much to learn that I can never ever get bored. I can, however, get burned out, and that is something that I've had to learn to manage. I think one of the things when you become self-employed, it's just like that case of, oh, I need to make sure I do absolutely everything. I've got to throw everything at it because I've got to pay the rent. And, you know, you can sort of get into that mode where you don't put your work down because I'm working at home. So getting burned out is something that I have experienced, but never ever bored. You know, even sometimes when I'm propping my eyes open, I'm still wanting to look at charts and or look at my cards. You know, that I do those. I use my cards a lot, so never ever bored. How did I come to the astrology path? It probably sounds a little bit airy-fairy to say I was guided, but I really was. I feel it is quite a bit of a strange story. I used to have dreams when I was very, very young about this old man, like a proper wizard character with its long beard. And he would stand with this kind of staff that had like this huge crystal at the end. Obviously, I'd seen some movie somewhere along the line. But he was always pointing upwards, pointing up to the sky. And every time I looked at what he was doing, he was pointing to the fact that the stars are actually moving. So I would be looking up and seeing these constellations moving through the sky and kind of changing positions. And it was really weird because then there would be this huge audience of people and nobody else could see it happening. Only I could see it happening. And I think that really was a dream for when I was young, sort of that feeling of being misunderstood, the feeling that I was seeing things that other people couldn't see. My grandmother had certain talents as far as sort of being very intuitive and very psychic, and she was actually a medium. She never practiced as a medium, but she saw spirit very clearly. She heard spirit. She would read signs. She taught me to read signs for like the birds in particular, kind of give us messages and so on, which again sounds a bit strange, but I still read the birds to this day and they still bring me messages to this day. So there was a lot of strange things that happened when I was young. I still remember watching a lunar eclipse when I was about 5 years old and being absolutely fascinated with it. I always wanted to watch sci-fi and fantasy as well on TV. And so it was like this slow unfolding. My father used to get Paranormal magazine. My grandmother read Old Moors magazine, which had a lot of bits of astrology in it. And I was just fascinated by anything weird, anything strange. I saw spirits when I was young, although I stopped kind of seeing spirits after sort of about the age of 6, because I basically got scared and I was like, I don't want to see you, and so I don't see them now, I just hear them. But I guess I was looking for a way of understanding who I was and what was this all about. So it naturally led me to things like reading about astrology and so on. And then when I was 14 years old, my grandmother gave me a fortune-telling deck, which we now know as the Lenormand deck. And that really just fascinated me. It just fascinated me completely. So then basically sort of life happened and I went to college and I was sort of wanting to be a journalist or a writer or whatever it was, anything that I could do that was creative, but particularly with writing. I've always done a lot of writing as well. And when my grandmother died, I had a reading, and it was my first reading, and it was with a medium. And I sat down and she said to me, "Oh, you will do my job." And I was absolutely gutted because I wanted her to tell me that, yes, I was going to get this wonderful job with the BBC or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. But the weird thing was that I absolutely knew she was right. I absolutely knew it without a shadow of a doubt. But I didn't know how to get to that point, and I didn't know if I wanted to do it, and I was terrified. I was really, really scared of taking this path that I've taken, because it just challenged me. I was afraid of what I was going to see. I was afraid of dealing with lots of people because I'm a bit of an introvert. And I was just scared because I didn't really know what it meant. And also, I think it felt as though it was very, very unconventional. And I came from a very conventional family. And I didn't know how to deal with that either. So I was told I was going to be doing this kind of work, although it wasn't specifically astrology that she said. But, you know, she was working with tarot cards and she knew about astrology and crystals and all those kinds of things. And I knew she was right, but I didn't know what to do with it. So time again moves on, and I finish college and I go out into the world and I get a normal job, and then I have a complete nervous breakdown. I was not well at all. I was hospitalised. I tried to commit suicide, and it was a long journey of experiences that I'd had sort of from being very young and so on that brought me to that point where I completely buckled and broke. And after that, I then moved to Manchester with some friends who kind of rescued me. And I didn't know what on earth I was going to do in my life, and I had no money whatsoever. So I went out busking because I thought, well, I can sing. And I was still reading my cards, my fortune-telling cards and so on. So anyway, I'm there busking, and one day when I'm busking there's me and the dog, and we're sort of doing our usual set routine, and someone comes over, and a very rude man comes over and waves his finger in my face and says, "Move." And I'm 20, 21, 22 at the time, and I'm a bit bolshy, and I'm just like, no, who are you? And it turns out he was CID. There was some kind of police situation going on, and I was in the way of their observations. So anyway, I'm sent on my way, and I had no money. I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do. So I thought, right, go to the job centre. Went to the job centre with my dog and my guitar, walked in, and in those times there was little cards on the walls with jobs on them. And I saw this job tarot reader wanted, and I thought, well, I've got my fortune-telling cards. I can do that, maybe. And I didn't really know what it was about. It just caught my interest. And so they rang the people at the job centre rang the tarot line and got me an interview there and then. So me, the guitar and the dog went to the interview, and the guy who was interviewing me gave me his set of tarot cards, because bearing in mind I still hadn't actually used tarot cards at that point, if I remember rightly. I might have had a Rider-Waite deck for a bit, but I'm a bit fuzzy on my memories there. But anyway, it was a deck that I'd never used. It was the Tarot of the Cat people. And he said, right, give me a reading. And I did. And he just said, you're hired. And so there I am, still with the dog and the guitar, suddenly employed as a tarot reader. And so it was a real baptism of fire. And I was working there for around a year, and that was where my skills and my challenges, everything, and I was challenged by everything that I was experiencing, because obviously we had so many different kinds of people calling, different kinds of queries, different problems, and I'm learning the tarot as I'm doing it. I hadn't really read many books or anything at that point, but I just had an intuitive knowing. And so time goes on, and naturally, because of the people that I was around, I was starting to meet people who did astrology as well. And that particular job ended, and then I went to another tarot line, and I had a reading with one of the people in the office. And she said, oh, you need to speak to my husband because he's an astrologer. And the very first thing he said to me is, I'm not a psychic, I'm not clairvoyant, I don't do any of that stuff, I just do astrology. And he proceeded to do this amazing reading for me. And I just thought, that's it, I really need to understand this properly. So that was really where I sort of realised this is something that I really want to do and I really want to understand. So gradually over time I started reading more, and I got Parker's Astrology. I used to figure out how to cast my charts by hand with logarithms and all that. None of the astrology programs that we have in now day to day. And so I learned how to incorporate the astrology into sort of with my tarot reading. So I'm very, very used to sort of doing astro tarot readings. And that was it really. It just kind of brought me to the path. So I worked full time for quite some time, like 2, 3, 4 or 5 years. I can't really remember now. And then a lot of the time I was doing it part time. And then some of the time I wasn't doing readings professionally, but I was always doing readings privately. And then sort of time rolled on, and I ended up working in a normal day job, the thing that I had never wanted to do, absolutely hated it, and it was destroying me, and it really destroying me, and I couldn't work out how to get out of it, but I knew what I wanted to do. So I set up Leah Astrology, and that was in 2008. And in 2013, it was like life just took over and just said, Leah, that is it. Get the hell out of here. You've got to change. You've got to do this now for a living. No more messing about. What actually happened was there was a huge fire, and the fire destroyed the building that I was working in. And it also killed a fireman as well. It was really, really bad. So it was quite traumatic and quite scary. I wasn't there when the fire was actually occurring, but obviously it affected us all. And so I didn't even know if I was going to have a job anymore. And then a week after that, just the following week after that, my friend died. So that was just, it just blew me out of the water completely. And the last thing that she'd said to me, she'd sent me a Facebook message saying that she was reading my astrology posts every day. And I just knew that was it, that I had to just say, that's no more of this messing around. I'm going to be an astrologer and tarot reader as well. And I handed my notice in there and then and just said, that's it. And so the journey that I've been on has been kind of quite crazy. But when I look back, when I reflect, I see that every sort of turning point that I've been at in my life has kept nudging me back always back in this direction. And there's been lots of other things that I haven't even kind of mentioned because this video would never end. But yeah, that is how I came to the path. Lua Astrology. Lua is Portuguese for moon, because I always feel a strong connection to the moon. I did consider calling it Estrela, which Estrela is Portuguese for star, but I just thought that maybe Lua was easier for people to say. And yeah, I just have a real fascination with Portugal. I talked about that recently I had an interview with the Infinity Astrological magazine. I'll put the link below, and I talk about what my thing is with Portugal and why. So you can read about that on there. So Dani says, at what point did you absolutely know this was going to become your career, not just a passion that you were forced to do in your spare time? So I've kind of already covered this now. I was going to try and sort of keep myself on track. It never really works. Anyway, so yeah, the time when I absolutely knew was when the medium said to me that I would do her job. But even though I wasn't actually doing it at that point, and it would still take me a year or so before I actually started working on the tarot line. But that was the point. And also, again, when my friend passed away, that, you know, it sounds really cliche, but it's really true that when someone close to you passes away, you really realise life is short. And there's no point waiting for the right moment to do something that you love. I was petrified. I had no money. I think I had £65 in my bank account. I had nothing. And I wouldn't recommend that as the way to go self-employed, by the way. If you're sitting there watching this and just thinking, right, what the hell, I'm going to go and tell my boss tomorrow, that's it. Try and maybe have a little bit of a cushion, because it does reduce some of the stress. But at the end of the day, you know, I very much feel that life protected me as well as guided me onto the path. So yes, I absolutely knew when I went to see the medium. Christina says, I'd love to know more about how you might use your intuitive abilities when connecting with the planets and asteroids. How I use my intuitive abilities. You know, the thing is, I think one of the benefits of me being a tarot reader before I was an astrologer, I mean, there was definitely some crossover, but I was primarily a reader of cards. I think I learned to almost like communicate with the cards as kind of entities. I remember years ago having this amazing dream where I had a new pack of cards, the first pack of cards actually that I ever bought for myself just after I started working on the tarot line, so I didn't have to borrow the Tarot of the Cat people from the boss. I had the Arthurian Tarot by Caitlin and John Matthews, which is just beautiful and still a deck that I use to this day. And I had this dream that I was walking through the cards. The cards became like this stairway, and I was going into each card and talking with each of the characters in the cards. And so I feel like that's how it is with the planets and the asteroids as well. It's like they are little entities of their own, and they have character. And whether we want to say that they are something sort of from my own imagination and I'm kind of working on the inner plane, and they are these archetypal forces, well, yes, that's what they are, and that's also what it is. But I also feel that they have these kind of presence, that's the only way I can put it, sort of presence in the other dimensions, in the other worlds, what I call the other worlds, and that there's something that we can commune with and communicate with. I would definitely say that meditation really, really helps with making a connection and with getting that intuitive feel of each of these planets, and also the asteroids as well. And I also think that it's like they start to speak to you. The more you ask to engage with them, then the more they will speak to you. So for an example, I just couldn't get a handle on series. Like, series to me was just like mother figure, nurturing. Like, I knew what it was meant to be, I knew the interpretation, but I couldn't feel it. Because my own relationship with my mother was somewhat challenged. I don't have children myself, and I just couldn't really get to grips with series. And also I was kind of thinking, well, I know she's more than mother. She's much more than just mother and nurturing, and she's feast and famine, and she also talks about loss as well. And funnily enough, although it wasn't a funny situation, but when I went through a very big loss, I suddenly realised that series was right in the middle of it. And that was when she caught my attention. And so I started to engage with her. Series, what is it that you're teaching me? What is this loss about? What do I need to learn from you? And kind of did some meditations and just allowed her to speak to me. And I will actually visualize an actual character that I'm interacting with. So yeah, sort of for intuitive abilities, I think it's watching and being perceptive and being mindful and doing the meditations and constantly sort of thinking about how those kind of deities are speaking to us. I mean, they can speak to us through our dreams as well. So I always advocate keeping a dream diary as well, so that you can see if any of these forces are connecting with you through your dreams as well. I'm very, very keen on that. I think it's really fascinating how a lot of the transits that we go through, in particular, or movements that go on in the chart, they can be translated through the dreams that we're having. And sometimes these forces, these archetypal forces, these deities that we're working with, the gods and the goddesses of the astrological chart, they come to us in our dreams. And sometimes they're wearing a mask, but once they take the mask off and you start to do the interpretation, then you can see that they are there speaking with you. So yeah, I think I'm a very intuitive reader. I can't imagine, I wouldn't know how to read a chart without using my intuition. It's all part of it. It's like when you're reading a chart for a client or for a friend, whoever you're reading a chart for, there is that moment when you just feel something is right, because there are so many different interpretations that you're going to get layer and layer and layer of interpretation for one particular placement in a chart. There's so many different possibilities of the way you can read that. So you're using your intuition then to guide you to what is the right interpretation for that person at this time as well, because sometimes that message is relevant to them, but at a different time that message wouldn't be relevant to them. So intuition is something that we all have, and I believe we all have, and it can definitely be honed over time through, like I say, sort of meditation in particular. Alana asked a question about, this kind of brings in the idea of ethics with astrology. So my question is perhaps more horror-y orientated. I don't know how much horror you do. How do you handle it when you quite clearly see in a chart that someone is likely to die or going to die, or a lost pet or a loved one has most likely already died? Firstly, I don't really read like that. For horror charts, for example, I'll use a horror chart as something that's kind of like an oracle. I know there are rules with horror chart. And in case you're watching and wondering, by the way, what is she talking about? What is a horror chart? A horror chart is a chart that is cast for a moment in time when a question is understood. So if you have a question, where is my lost dog? You can ask that question to an astrologer, or you can do it yourself. You have an astrological program. And at the moment you cast that chart, that chart then will form the answer to your question. So that is one way we can use horary. I also, like I say, I use horary as more of an oracle. So what do you need to know during this time, rather than is it this or is it that, sort of the black and white, dead or alive kind of question. Because also, of course, ethically speaking, I think, well, personally, I subscribe to the rule that you do not tell your client that someone or something is dead or about to die. I just think it's morally wrong. Basically, I have very, very strict and strong opinions about that, mostly because I've had to pick up the pieces sort of several times now with clients who have been told this by somebody. One person particularly recently was told that her husband was going to die in a really, really bad way as well. And it was so unnecessary. And I should also say, hubby is alive and kicking as well. And so they were completely wrong. So firstly, even though we might be absolutely convinced that that is what's happened, the room for error is so wide that we're not gods and we can't predict that. Even if we're absolutely sure, and yes, I have had circumstances in my own life. It's almost like Spirit has kind of always known, you can't give this to a client, so we're not going to give it to you either. But for myself, I've been given information, particularly when my mother died, when my mother was going to die, I should say, because I had a very vivid dream about, when was it, 18 months before she died, telling me that she was going to die, and also showing me the dates of what I thought of when it was going to happen. Actually, the date turned out to be the day that I found out that she was really, really ill. And at that moment, as soon as I knew she was ill, I knew she was going to die. And she did. Also, some very strange things happened at that time. For example, when she had a brain tumour, so she died of a brain tumour. And we were just coming home from, she just had the brain tumour operated on to start with, they were going to try and see if anything could be done there and just relieve some of the symptoms, although they couldn't cure it. But we hadn't had the full analysis at that point, even though I was absolutely convinced, I know that this is going to happen. And as we drove home, there were 3 cars that overtook our car in succession. And looking at the license plates, one said cry, one said sad, and one said woe. And it was like, one of my rules with sort of intuitive information is whether you are given the information 3 times. It's kind of like with astrology, that if you see 3 confirmations of something, then it's likely that that is the situation that you're dealing with. So I think that sort of the universe does give us the information sometimes that we need to know, but what we do with that information, we have to be very, very careful. We have to be careful of the people that it might impact upon, and sometimes you just have to keep that to yourself, and you just have to keep that quietly, in your heart, and maybe use that information to help you to have more compassion for the person that you're dealing with, or the people that you're dealing with, as well as compassion for yourself. Sometimes we're given information just simply to prepare us, to give us a heads up. But as far as actually telling a client, I'm sorry, your dog's dad, or something along those lines, I think is not actually even helpful. So yeah, strict rule, never say something like that to your client. And if it's for yourself, if it's the information that's come through to you, then it's something that you just need to hold and make space for, because life does happen and death happens. My other friend, my very, very close and much beloved friend, my friend Amy, died almost 2 years ago now. It's like 18 months ago now. And that was just the shock of my life, and that was just, it completely floored me. And I did have a little moment when I last spoke to her, when I put the phone down, I suddenly had this really weird thought of that could be the last time I ever speak to her. But I pushed that thought away. And as it turns out, it was the last time that I spoke to her. But I was very lucky. And I know, again, this is going to sound cliched, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's important. When our other friend, I talked earlier about when we had the fire at the building that I worked at, and a week later my friend passed away, my friend Helen. And when Helen passed away, that really impacted upon my other friend, particularly. We were all friends together. But after she'd passed away, myself and my friend Dani always used to end our conversations with "love you," you know, just kind of funny, but we meant it. We always meant it. And we never had any qualms about telling each other that we love each other, you know, as friends. And that is, for me, the greatest gift, that even though she passed away and it devastated me, there was nothing left unsaid. And I think that is really, really important, to say what you need to the people that you love, even if it's as simple as "I love you." So anyway, yeah, I've kind of got very sidetracked. Can't even remember what the question was now. Okay, so yeah, we were talking about horror, and I was talking about how death does, of course, happen, and I think we just have to just hold space for those people that are suffering and do the best that we can for them. Okay, so Lin says, in your opinion, how much of life's experience is destiny and how much is free will? Destiny is a funny word, because destiny sort of means that there's one destination, one place that you're going. And I kind of prefer the word fate, actually. But I get the question. So, fate, free will, it's a big one. It's a big one that we're all trying to figure out. In my experience, and that's the only thing I can talk from really, in my experience, I would say that it's maybe around 50-50, that I do believe that we've come here in this incarnation. I do believe in reincarnation, and that we come into different lives to have different experiences, and we've set those experiences into motion, or planned those experiences so that they will happen, and we're brought to the place where we can complete the plan that we said that we wanted to do. So if we are born into this lifetime, there are certain situations, certain people, maybe even a certain career or calling that we have already pre-arranged, certain circumstances perhaps that we've already pre-arranged. And we get a weird little feeling, I think, sometimes when we meet someone in particular. Now, whether it's romantic or otherwise, not always romantic situations, that we get a feeling that we've known someone before. I had a very stark one of these years ago. It did turn out to be a little bit of a fling with someone, but nothing more than that. But it actually turned out to be very important, a turning point for me, that I remember sitting in a coffee shop and this guy walks in and we both looked at each other and we were a bit like, "Oh, hello, do I know you? Oh, no, I do know. Where do I know you from?" And we were both really confused. And then we realised that we didn't know each other. We'd never met. Anyway, things ensued. We had a little bit of a fling, a little bit of a relationship, a few months. But that kind of petered out. But what was important is that he gave me my first computer. He showed me how a computer worked, and if I remember rightly, I think he actually bought me an astrology program. I know that he gave me the computer because I wanted to get an astrology program. So he was really fundamental for sort of gearing me towards this path that I'm now on. Really, really fundamental. I mean, I was terrified of computers before I met him. When I was trying to switch it on for the first time, was literally like, oh, cringing, because I thought I was going to press something wrong and the whole thing was going to blow up. I have a tendency to exaggerate because I've got a big Jupiter square in my chart. Anyway, so yes, sometimes I think there are people and situations that we have prearranged and that we're brought to. However, we always have the free will not to choose that path. We always have the free will to walk away. We always have the free will to how we respond to anything that is being experienced in our lives. So the free will that we have can then govern how the future unfolds. And then, of course, we're creating new karma. We're creating new lessons for ourselves in the future lives. And also, obviously, sort of creating situations and consequences for ourselves in this life as well. And so the next question is, Ineisha, what advice can you offer someone looking to practice astrology and tarot professionally? This is a whole video that I need to make on its own, I think. But just for some quick guidance, practice, 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 practice. Get lots and lots of bookshelves because you're going to read lots. Seriously. Practicing is really important. Practicing on yourself, doing readings for yourself, I think is really, really important, and you can learn a phenomenal amount by doing that. Of course, readings for friends and then readings for colleagues or sort of people that you don't know, just to get as much practice as possible so that you are connecting with different types of people, so that you're seeing different things within your cards or within the astrology and so on, and you're getting used to the techniques that work for you and the ones that don't work for you. I'm also a very keen advocate of personal development, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with other people, excuse me, with their emotions, with their experiences and so on. And I think it's very, very important to have that self-awareness so that we're not projecting our own material onto that situation. There is perhaps always going to be a little of that because we are only human, but we need to have the awareness of when something is pressing our buttons or when something is reminding us of our own circumstances and so on. So I actually advocate the idea of having therapy, and also maybe perhaps doing some counselling training as well, so that at least sort of just doing a certificate, person-centred certificate in counselling, so that you understand the idea of how to listen to someone and how to respond to someone, and also just that how to listen to yourself and how to recognise when you may be projecting material onto somebody else, because that's very, very important. You know, it's not light and fluffy. It's not all angels and everything's lovely. Sometimes you're dealing with really, really heavy stuff. And so that is why I think it's very important to be ready for that. Because you never know what someone is going to bring to you. So yes, some personal development, some personal therapy, a counselling course if you can to help you with interacting with clients and so on, and making sure that you do what you feel is right for you. So when you're looking at what other people are doing, the kinds of readings, for example, that other people are doing, don't feel as though you've got to do that. Find your tribe of clients. There's you know, the type of clients that come to you, you'll start to end up calling, or you can call the right types of client to you. You can call the right people to you by the way you market yourself, by the things that you talk about. And don't try and be all things to all people. You don't have to be. Just be yourself. Just be the reader that you are with the tarot and the astrology, and that will suffice, and that will be best for you. Because if you're trying to be something that you're not, then that will just get really uncomfortable and really old really soon. And Ineisha also says, what have you learned along the way that has helped you strengthen your spiritual connection with the universe? Everything happens for a reason. That's what I've learned, for me anyway. Everything happens for a reason. There's always an underlying message. And life is constantly in communication with us. I believe life is constantly in communication with me. And therefore, if I'm not hearing the message, then maybe I'm resisting something. Sometimes also life, spirit, the universe, whatever you want to call it, also steps back to allow you to get on with what you're doing, to allow you to make some decisions without holding your hand constantly. I sort of see my spirit guides as a bit like a sort of mother who's watching her child walk away from her, and every now and again they might be toddling, you know, and the toddler sort of falls over, and instead of rushing over to pick them up, the mother sort of stands back and just lets them get themselves up and brush themselves off and then keep walking. And that's a little bit how I feel sometimes, that life can just let us get on with what we're doing and allow us sometimes to make our own mistakes as well. And I think that's also important because that's a bit of a learning curve. So yeah, life is always in communication with us. Life is often setting up experiences and setting up situations. So trust is important. I've had to learn to trust. Trust was very, very hard for me. But I've learned to trust, and I think as well, sort of trusting your first thoughts. This kind of also goes back to being a tarot reader and astrologer as well. Trust your first thoughts, trust your first instinct, because that's normally the right one. Now, I'm noticing that this video has got really long. I kind of expected this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to end this video because it was I've come to the end of the questions, which are more about myself and my practice, and I'm going to make another video which will encapsulate the other questions that people asked, which there's lots to come on transits, on natal chart configurations, on techniques, astrological techniques and so on. But yeah, I'm just going to end this for now and then start a new video, and we can move on to all of the other questions. Thank you for listening.